government policy and government objectives. We're done with government objectives. Now we're going to government policies. We're talking about government policies, we're talking about different, stop writing please. And pen down. We're talking about different government laws, regulations that is used to protect the environment, the local businesses. That's what government policies is about. So I'm going to start anyway. The first one is competition policy. We're talking about competition policy. We're talking about different ways in which government will pass laws to discourage anti-competitive practices. Pen down. So different ways government will come with their laws to ensure that there are no practices that will discriminate employment. I'm having a video. So for anti-competitive practices, these are against competition. So government will ensure that those things do not happen. That is what competition policy is about. Do you understand what competition policy is here? So one of the ways in which government wants to do this is to encourage the growth of small firms. When small firms are able to grow in that market, it means the large ones, the few large ones that are dominating, will not be able to dominate. Then competition will start increasing. But when you have few large firms dominating the industry, it becomes oligopoly. That's what it means. It's a market structure where few large firms dominate the industry. But if this happens, it means customers are still vulnerable. But what government wants is non-vulnerability of customers. And to get this done, those small firms should grow so that they can compete with the large firms. So that's the first point, encourage the growth of small firms. Do you understand encouraging the growth of small firms? Do you get it or not? Yes. The second point, lower barriers to entry. There are barriers to entry which are restrictions to entry. So government will ensure that these restrictions are stopped or lowered. So without restriction, it means any other new business would come into the market. If there's restriction in the educational industry, new schools will not be able to get themselves established. That is what barriers to entry means. The inability of new firms to come into the market, that is restriction. But government will ensure that this does not happen. Do we get it? Yes. We are talking about competitive practices, our competition policies. The first one I talked about is to encourage the growth of small firms. If small firms are able to grow, it means they'll be able to compete with those large firms. Then competition will increase and be fierce in the market. The second point is about lower barriers to entry, which these are restrictions that stops other new firms from coming into the market. Government will ensure that this doesn't happen. So if this doesn't happen, it means new businesses can come into the market and a lot of competition will be in the market, a lot of choices for customers. You get the second point, please. The third one, introduce anti-competitive legislation. Government will come up with laws that will discourage merger, that will discourage cartel. Is it clear? Is it clear, please? Yes. Then we'll go to environmental legislation. We're done with competition legislation, competition policy. Now we're going to environmental legislation. For environmental legislation, most of the time, businesses, they produce goods and services. They produce goods. In the course of producing these goods, they damage the environment. So government wants to ensure that the environment is not damaged. Government wants to ensure it can reduce the damage businesses cause to the environment. And to do this, they have to come up with laws that will discourage it. Do you understand? Example of what they could do is they give pollution permits, they give fines, they stop businesses, they ban them. Is it clear? That way, you can go that way. Through that way. Through that way, there's a video. Are you guys with me, please? Yes. So that's about environmental legislation. Then we go to trade policy. For trade policy, we're talking about trade is the buying and selling of goods and services. So buying and selling of goods and services. Please close the door. And this way. Thank you. Trade is the buying and selling of goods and services. So for buying and selling of goods and services, government wants to monitor how we buy and how we sell to ensure that we are not being vulnerable, we are not being exploited. Get the point here? There's always going to be buying and selling. But government wants to be sure that whatever they sell to us, it's fair, that we are not exploited. That is the point. Do you get what I'm saying here? Do we get trade policy here? Yes. Trade means buying and selling of goods and services. But in the course of buying and selling, government wants to ensure that we are not being exploited. So I won't. Government sometimes believe it is in the interest of the country to restrict trade as it will protect the local industry. So for local industry, because there is international trade and there is internal trade. Internal trade means trade within the country, and international trade means trade between countries. So trade between countries, that means you can trade with Turkey, Tunisia, Spain, and the rest. In the course of doing this, you shouldn't expose your local industry. You should also protect your local industry, because if you don't protect them, those international businesses will come in and supersede them. Do you get the point here? It is a notion that whatever we buy from abroad is better than the local businesses or local products, yes or no? So it means government has a lot of work to do to ensure that it encourages the consumption of local products instead of the consumption of international or importation or imported products. Do you get the point I'm making here? So it is in the best interest of the country for government to protect its local industry so that they can grow and also compete internationally. Do you get the point? Government has to protect the local industries so that they can also grow and compete with international competitors. Do you get the point here? Yes. So why do government have to do this? One, to protect jobs if foreign businesses become a threat to local businesses. If foreign businesses come in due to globalization, they are allowed to come in, yes or no? If they come in and they become a threat to businesses, the local businesses might shut down. And if they do shut down, a lot of people would lose their job, isn't it? So government would ensure that they don't lose their job, because one of the government objectives is to ensure that there's increasing employment in the economy or to reduce unemployment. And the government has to reduce unemployment. It needs to encourage new businesses to set up, not businesses closing down. Because as soon as the business closes down, the workers in that organization also loses their job. So government will protect them by ensuring that multinationals do not take over the local space. Do you get the first point? The second one, to protect infant industries. What are infant industries? These are industries that are just coming up, that are yet to be established. Like some 15 years ago, the educational industry is not like this. It was infant, but now it is established. So if the government of this country does not protect the educational industry, it might not be what it is becoming now. Do you get the second point? The third one, to raise revenue from tariffs. Government also knows that there's globalization. So there's nothing government will do about globalization. Because if government wants to stop globalization, there's always what we call retaliation. Get my point here? If government is using globalization, if government is restricting trade, if government is stopping other businesses from coming to the country, other countries will stop us from selling to other countries too. That is retaliation. Do you get what I mean there? So, yeah, whatever you do to us, we do it back to you. If you stop us from coming here, we stop you from coming to our side too. Do you get the point here? So that is what we call retaliation. To avoid retaliation, government would not strictly or simply stop trade. Government would only come up with tariffs, taxes on importation. So instead of government to stop, government will increase tax on what you bring into the country. So as government does that, it means they will be able to raise more revenue through taxes. But it is taxes on importation. So whatever goods you are bringing into the country, government has tax on them. We call it tariff. Do you understand tariff? So that increase in tax brings about more revenue for government. Then government can use it for infrastructure, health, education, and so on. Is it clear? And the last one, to prevent dumping. When we talk about dumping simply means the price of the imported products is lesser than the domestic products. We all assume that, it's a notion that imported products are supposed to be expensive, yes or no? But let's assume this is made in Libya, and there's another one made from maybe Turkey.